I never believed in guardian angels until I met Harold at the worst moment of my life. There I was 62 years old, sitting in my broken-down Honda in a hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My husband Richard had just passed away after a 3-month battle with pancreatic cancer. The doctors had done everything they could, but sometimes love isn't enough to keep someone here. I'd spent the last 72 hours by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering all the things I should have said years ago. When he took his final breath, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away. The nurses were so kind, but eventually I had to leave. I walked to the parking lot in a daze, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. That's when my car decided it had had enough too. The engine made this awful grinding sound and just died. No amount of turning the key would bring it back to life. I sat there in the darkness, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. Richard and I had been married for 38 years. We'd raised 2 beautiful children who now lived across the country with families of their own. My parents were gone, my sister lived in Florida, and I realized with crushing clarity that I had no one to call. No one who could drop everything at 2 in the morning to help a broken-hearted widow whose car wouldn't start. That's when I heard a gentle tap on my window. I looked up to see an elderly black man with the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He was probably in his 70s, wearing a worn jacket and a baseball cap that had seen better days. For a moment I was scared. Here I was, vulnerable and alone in a dark parking lot. But something about his face, maybe it was the way he smiled so gently, made me roll down the window. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but notice you might be having some trouble," he said in a voice that reminded me of warm honey. "I'm Harold. I work nights here cleaning the hospital. Are you all right?" I tried to speak, but the words came out in a rush of tears and hiccups. "My husband he's gone. And now my car won't start and I don't know what to do." Harold's expression softened even more. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said simply. "Would you mind if I took a look under the hood? I've been tinkering with cars since I was 12 years old." I popped the hood, and Harold spent about 10 minutes examining the engine with a small flashlight. He made some adjustments, checked some wires, and then asked me to try starting it again. Nothing. He tried a few more things, his weathered hands moving with surprising dexterity, but it was clear the car wasn't going anywhere. "Well," he said, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his pocket, "she's going to need more help than I can give her tonight. But I'll tell you what, my shift ends in about an hour. If you don't mind waiting, I'd be happy to give you a ride home." I should have called a cab or an Uber, but the thought of being alone in my empty house made my chest tighten with panic. There was something so calming about Harold's presence that I found myself nodding. "I'd like that very much," I whispered. Harold brought me a cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria and sat with me in the waiting area. We talked for an hour about everything and nothing. He told me about his late wife, Margaret, who'd passed 5 years earlier after 42 years of marriage. He understood the particular kind of emptiness I was feeling. The way the world suddenly becomes too quiet when the person you've shared your life with is no longer there to fill the silence. When his shift ended, Harold drove me home in his old pickup truck. He insisted on walking me to my door, making sure I got inside safely. Before he left, he wrote his phone number on a piece of paper. "Now, I know you don't know me from Adam," he said, "but if you need anything, groceries, a ride somewhere, or just someone to talk to, you call me. Grief isn't something anyone should face alone." Over the next few months, Harold became my lifeline. He helped me arrange Richard's funeral when I was too overwhelmed to think straight. He drove me to doctor's appointments and grocery stores when I couldn't bear to face the world alone. When I had panic attacks in the middle of the night, I'd call him, and he'd talk me through them with infinite patience. But more than the practical help, Harold gave me something I desperately needed: hope that I could survive this. He'd lost Margaret to Alzheimer's, and he shared how he'd learned to carry his love for her in his heart, while still finding reasons to smile each day. He taught me that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry with grace. Harold helped me discover that I was stronger than I knew. He encouraged me to join a grief support group, where I met other widows who became dear friends. He was there when I decided to volunteer at the hospital where Richard had died, finding purpose in comforting other families going through what I'd experienced. 3 years later, Harold and I remain close friends. We have coffee every Tuesday morning, and I help him with his computer when his grandchildren send emails with photos. He still checks on me, but now it's less about survival and more about celebrating the life I've built from the ashes of my old one. I think about that night in the parking lot often. What if Harold hadn't been working? What if he'd minded his own business and walked past my car? What if I'd been too proud or too frightened to accept help from a stranger? The truth is, angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they come in the form of a kind-hearted janitor who sees someone drowning and throws them a lifeline. Harold didn't just help me fix my car problems or grief. He reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there are still good people in this world who care about strangers. If you're going through something difficult right now, please know this. Help often comes from the most unexpected places. Be open to kindness, even when it comes from someone you don't know. And when you're on the other side of your struggle, remember to be someone else's Harold. We all have the power to be guardian angels for each other.